Hi and welcome to the director's commentary of Trapped. So I started this whole project by researching existing examples of short films. I watched lots of short films on YouTube and I also analysed several of them in detail. The most common conventions that I found were that they were all around 5 minutes long, sometimes longer. The narrative still has little depth and background just purely because of the time constraints of being a short film. I also noticed that most of them were very serious rather than funny. Most of the examples that I looked at were dramas or thrillers or horrors. Therefore, I decided to base my film on a serious issue and make it into a drama. The serious issue I chose was schizophrenia. This was partly influenced by psychology, which I study. It was also influenced because I thought this may be a way to get more character information into the short amount of time, purely because the plot would be character based. I watched several existing examples of short films about schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. Several of these addressed mental illnesses whilst highlighting how people's preconceptions kind of get in the way of what we think about the mentally ill. From seeing some of these films, certainly The Egg most stood out to me, was that I really wanted to avoid all these common preconceptions about schizophrenia and just mental illnesses in general. I therefore researched schizophrenia more in depth about the misconceptions people have. The main stereotype about schizophrenics is that they're very violent, so I wanted to completely steer clear of any thoughts of my schizophrenic character being violent. Another convention that I found in several of the short films I looked at, such as Inside, they leave the plot unresolved. The whole film builds up to a certain point, and then it ends without the plot being resolved. So it doesn't follow the traditional Todorov's theory of, equilibrium, returning to equilibrium. And I quite like this, so I wanted to follow this trend by revealing a kind of a big twist at the end of the film, but then stopping it there so it remains unresolved. Another short film that I watched which influenced quite a bit was Love Field. All the way through it built up into a kind of film about a thriller, about something quite nasty and serious, but then at the end turned out to be about something very innocent and actually quite nice. So I wanted to follow this kind of trend. So therefore I wanted my movie to start off to be more of like what would be considered a buddy movie, kind of not a comedy, but not, something that's going to be really serious. So therefore I had to slightly research conventions of buddy movies. I found the openings generally start with a music montage. I commonly found that it was upbeat music playing, with some kind of montage happening, either of the location or of the characters and everything. I therefore used this convention and had a montage of the main character walking around town with an upbeat lyrical track in the background as soundtrack. Alongside my short film, I had to produce 2 ancillary tasks. These were film poster and a magazine review. As with when I first started producing my short film, I first looked at existing examples of film posters and magazine reviews to find the most common conventions of both media forms. I looked at film posters for films that were about mental illnesses and schizophrenia. The 2 ones I looked at most were the posters for Fight Club and A Beautiful Mind, and I also looked at the poster for The Soloist. The common conventions of all film posters I found were things such as title, tagline, billing card, reviews and star ratings from magazines and other sources, an image, the actors' names, and really I'm obviously quite familiar with film posters anyway, as they're an everyday part of people's lives in the media. In reference to the ones I looked at that directly related to schizophrenia, Fight Club influenced me as it had a picture of both of the characters one more in the foreground, one in the background. It was also the same in the soloist, both characters on the poster. A Beautiful Mind only had Russell Crowe's character on the front, but I thought, as my film really does have two main characters, that I would go more for the format with Fight Club and the soloist and have both characters on there. I followed as many of the common conventions as possible so as to produce a conventional poster that would fit into the current market and advertising styles. I also did the same with the magazine article. I looked at two different examples of film magazines, Empire and Sight of Sound. Each had different conventions as each were aimed at a different sort of target. Sight and Sound is a much more higher brow magazine and is generally more serious. Empire was less detailed and more casual, and it was also quite comedic in places. After looking at both of them, I chose to do my review for Empire magazine, as I believe my target audience of 17 to 25 is much more likely to read Empire than Sight of Sound, and that the review style of Empire is going to be more appealing to them. The main conventions of Empire magazine reviews were a film still of the film, a tagline and information about the film, but nowhere near as detailed as Sight and Sound magazine. I've also followed as many of these as possible, like I did with the film poster, so my review would easily fit into a real edition of Empire magazine. I followed the conventions of the poster and the review much closer, because defying these conventions would mean that they wouldn't be appealing and wouldn't have a place in the real market. It is much easier to defy certain conventions of short films and the genre that I did. Going back to my short film, many short films that I watched had little or no dialogue, and they were simply based on action, with either musical score over the top or just ambient sound. My own short film had a great deal of dialogue, as my story really relied on that dialogue to carry the narrative. Also, I used several different locations, whilst most of the short films that I watched had only one, maybe two different locations. I in total had 4 main scenes, all in different locations. I defied this convention purely because my narrative simply wouldn't have worked if it had taken place in one location in a continuous scene.